All right, welcome to the W3C WEBRTC Working Group meeting in January of 2026. Only members of the working group can make substantive contributions. Next slide. We abide by the W3C IPR policy. We have future meetings coming up February 17th, March 24th, April 21st. And next slide. Here you find the meeting info and our latest drafts. And we need a scribe, I believe. We have someone who can scribe or take notes.
I can scribe.
Okay, thank you. All right, next slide. We follow the W3C Code of Conduct. We're passionate, but let's improve WEBRTC while keeping conversations cordial and professional. Next slide. Raise your hand in the meeting, Google Meet, to get on the speaker queue and wait for your microphone access to be granted before speaking. Thank you. Next slide. Document status. We've seen this slide before. We can skip. And these are today's issues and discussions. We'll be talking about Pepsi for camera and microphone, as well as how the working group can collaborate with Pepsi. And then that's going to take the first hour, and then we have some smaller issues. Rename in WEBRTC transform, dropped frame counter, media capture transform, and that's it. And next slide. So the first item is me. I have about 12 slides here. So I'm trying to get an overview of Pepsi for camera and microphone. Pepsi stands for Page Embedded Permission Control, and is a proposal for new UX that has had some discussions. There's a Pepsi group in a WICG, I think. And we've had a previous meeting, we discussed that we had a resolution rather to use media capture streams or its extension to provide a Pepsi integration section as an anchor for further discussions. So to do that, we need to decide what goes into it and what API shape we want. So Chrome 144 has already shipped a geolocation HTML element, which I think provides a good starting point. And I put two links. If you have the links to the slide deck, you can look later. I have 2 links to previous discussion on geolocation and user media. So here I'll try to present a vision for using camera and microphone through Pepsi today and tomorrow. There are four parts to this. I'll give a brief overview of the geolocation API as I understand it. And then I'll propose an allow on button push persistent permission idea. And then I'll propose some API shapes for microphone, camera, and user media elements. And lastly, down the road, look at potential for improved device selection. Next slide. So in some of those earlier discussions on user media, I had these 2 screenshots at the very end, showing some what I think are problems or limitations with the Pepsi 1.0 as far as it pertains to our working group and camera and microphone, which is that the picture on the left shows existing code for Pepsi in WEBRTC, and it shows that you have to push basically 3 buttons to turn on camera. You have to push the button toggle, which brings up a web-based prompt that has a button that says use camera. To be fair, there's also a button, not in this particular case, where you can use camera and microphone. Oh, sorry. Can you go back? Yeah. And then you have to, once you click on the blue button, you get a 3rd prompt where you can choose allow this time or allow always. So for camera and microphone, that's Pepsi's actually making it worse, I think, than today, because you need 3 clicks instead of 2. And this is because while the Pepsi button is technically page embedded, it's not really embedded in the page layout proper. Rather, it looks different enough that there's really no real estate in existing video conferencing software for this button. So it's usually shown as a prompt, a website prompt, which solves a couple of web developer problems like permission regret, because it's basically, but it's not solving it in a user-friendly way because it's adding an extra layer. The user is basically being asked twice, which might be good for initial priming, but on return visits, it's not great. So on the right, is a mock-up that how it might look if we can embed the button into the page itself, basically number 1 there, by replacing an existing button. Next slide. So here it's helpful to look at the geolocation element. There's a link there if you want to test it out in Chrome. It's shipped in 144. And it looks as shown. It's a pretty basic button with an icon, and it says use location. Now, importantly, it doesn't say access location or location permission. This is actually a button through which you use geolocation. And I'm not showing the HTML here, but the HTML is basically what you see in the headline. It's not a lot. It's just basically geolocation, and then the ID is the same, and then an end tag. So I like to look at API shapes by using them as an example. And I think through examples, I think is a good way to see if an API works well or not. So here we have, so the user clicks on the button because they want to use the location. And this fires a location event on the button that we can intercept here. And then, and then once you have the event fired, it means that the button itself has new information, and that can be in the form of an error, in which case we can throw that error. It has a bit of a legacy shape based on geolocation. That's specific to geolocation, which means the error has a name, both the name and an error code in some cases, or either or. But that aside, the more interesting part is when it succeeds, it returns latitude, longitude, and accuracy, and you can get that information. Now, I call this a page embedded powerful feature control button. So I'm kind of proposing a little bit of a brand rename here, is that we're not just getting permission to use this feature, we're actually using it through the button. And it also means that the user, not the website, initiates resource acquisition by using the feature through the button. Yuan?
Yeah, does this mean that you get the callback being called once per click, or is it like you get multiple location as the user is changing places? And so is it like a one-time permission for just now, or is it now and a little bit later?
So I believe that I'm showing the simplest. If you just use the geolocation element without any options, I believe there are options to auto-locate, which means that if you have persistent permission, it would fire immediately. But in its basic shape, and there might also be a watch feature that I'm not going into here, but the basic location, what my understanding was from playing with it, if you just say geolocation with no options, it's only when you push the button. But Mike might have more info.
I don't have much to add. Basically,
okay,
clicking the button will give the user a choice, and they can decide to give it to the page all the time. And the page can request the ability to get it all the time with a watch attribute mimicking the JavaScript API.
Great. Yes. So I think this slide stands on its own, but the next slide will show how this fits into existing features. Next slide. Unless there are more questions on that one. All right. So here, the legacy API for geolocation would be the get current position method. And this slide is a little busy, but it's trying to show how they interact basically. And so you have, and that's also a fiddle you can try if you're on Chrome. The button on the left is the legacy API. And we're also showing geolocation permission, which is initially prompt in this example. And arrows down, and you see different UX also in Chrome. And you'll see that they're almost identical. There's a difference. The never allow button is missing in the one on the right. That's a Chrome choice. I don't want to fixate too much on that right here, but the idea is that once you go through the prompt, your geolocation permission turns to granted, temporarily at least, or permanently, depending on whether you chose the blue path or the red path. And that's to indicate in this slide that from that point on, whether you use, regardless of which button you use, the page now has legacy access through the legacy API at that point. But however, where things differ is when you close the tab and open a new tab, which is what I call future visits at the bottom, there's a difference, which is that if you do allow always the red arrow, then you have a privacy trade-off, and that the website is basically deciding on future visits when to turn on the camera and microphone. So the user has given up that control. If the user wants to retain that control, then they follow the blue path of allow this time only, in which case everything works fine in the same session, but as soon as you close the tab and open a new one, future visit, you get prompt fatigue because you get all the same prompts. So nothing new here. This is the same problem with existing UX, basically. So how can we improve this? So that's next slide. So it's a new idea here called allow on button push. That might not be the exciting or ideal wording, but the idea is it's a new persisted yet unexposed permission level to simplify feature use by the user. So in this case, the user clicks the use location button. They get the prompt with now a new option, the second option, which is allow on button push. And when they push that, they still get geolocation permission granted temporarily. But on future visits, they can now, another bit is persisted basically that says on future visits, then don't get prompt as long as the website goes through the Pepsi button first, if that makes sense. Any questions on that? So basically, yeah, go ahead.
So how does this interact with the permissions query thing, where the web page can basically tell what is going to happen when I put a button?
So that's what the slide is trying to communicate that with the geolocation permission, which is initially prompt. And when you allow on button push, it's basically the same as allow this time, as far as permission is concerned, is that you get permission granted until the tab is closed. And that point in the future visit, it goes back to prompt. So the legacy API, so we can, if we go to the next slide, actually shows, wait, sorry, that's two. Go one slide ahead. If you can go one more slide, and we'll come back to this one. So in a future visit, basically after allow on button push, you will find that as long as you use the use location button, you don't get a prompt. But if you call the legacy API, you will get a prompt unless you use the button first. But if you use the button first, you will get the temporary granted permission, in which case, so basically the legacy API is riding coattails on usage of the new button.
So, but there's no way for the web page to tell what is going to happen when the user pushes the use location button, whether you're on the left-hand side or the right-hand side.
Not ahead of time now, but when they push it, obviously, they will get, the user might get a prompt, or they might have the location fire immediately.
Yeah, but the page doesn't know that.
Yeah, there's no current proposal to expose that permission, although I guess we could do that if there was a need. Tim?
Yeah, pedantically, the user experience is actually different between the left and the right, more different than you're saying, between the left and the right on Chrome on macOS. The interaction with the OS is different, as it turns out. Like I have location permission off for Chrome, and the way that the prompting works is different on the left from the right example in ways. It doesn't hugely matter, but it does raise the point that this does have to go a level deeper and be consistent, get consistent behavior from the operating system as well as from the from the user agent.
Yes, that's a good point. In these slides, I'm assuming that the browser already has OS permission from the operating system, which of course is not true the first time you use your browser and the first time a web page asks this question.
Yeah, but the user experience is not only is that true, but it's different on the left and the right. I just tried it in Chrome, and the behavior is like I actually get different prompts.
Oh, okay. I haven't tested it without OS permission, so thank you for catching that. But I think for this discussion, if we go 2 slides back, yes, so this was the allow on button push. And then if we go to the next slide, Yuan?
How do you anticipate users to understand the difference between allow and button push, allow while visiting the site, and allow this time?
So these are to answer that great question. These are all UX questions that we really don't need to standardize, and it's up to the individual browsers to first of all decide how many options to present. So the idea here is that you could ask, all of these can be hard to understand, like allow while visiting the site. What does that mean? It's basically, we know that it's allow always. Allow this time, what does that mean? It's also unclear. Allow on button push is no better than existing UX. And it's not necessary that browsers have to use these words. So these are just concepts for us at the moment. For instance, in Firefox, we've considered if you have both allow on button push and allow always, do we need both? So we might, for instance, think about sacrificing if we have we're wondering if we have allow on button push, do we need allow always, for example, questions like that. So those are UX questions. But what's interesting here that I wanted to show, and also I should say that this slide shows no new information. It shows the same information as the previous slides. It's just showing it all together. That was the attempt there, to show that the green arrow, basically the middle arrow, allow on button push, provides a new option that we didn't have before. We no longer have to, with prompt fatigue, the only way out of prompt purgatory was basically to finally allow permission always, and then give up control to the website to when the camera comes on or microphone. And here we have a middle ground where there's no prompt or privacy compromise, or just minimal privacy compromise, where the control to turn on the camera or the microphone still rests with the user, which is personally why I don't grant persistent permissions to websites, because I was lacking this feature.
It's true, but we already, so without Pepsi, we have like user gesture activation, for instance, which is a heuristic that could be used instead of the Pepsi button. So it's already, so the thing on the right is already feasible by user agents today. And that's not to say that Pepsi native button is not providing something that can be used for better UX. We'll see. But from a user's perspective, it's difficult for me to understand how the user will see that a button is Pepsi or a button is not Pepsi.
Well, so 2 points there. So first, you call it user gesture. It's now called transient activation, which used to be a guarantee that was stricter than it is today. It's kind of morphed into a kind of weak protection where any click on the page at all within up to 4 or 5 seconds is enough to turn a feature on. So, and I think going to basically DOM teams and asking for that, trying to specify going that route might be possible, but seemed more difficult and less intuitive than, frankly, than just having a real button, because when you have a real button, a lot of click jacking, a lot of things become simpler to implement, I think. And sorry, what was your second? Users. I think getting users to understand this, I think, is doable by basically, it's no worse than existing options, I would say, wording-wise. And the point is to provide a behavior that is beneficial to users, and then we could always bike shed what to call it. I don't think users need to know whether it's a Pepsi button or not, because all that happens is they click on the button and they get choices. And if they clicked on the button on the left, they don't get the choice to allow on button push. So it's an inherent new feature that only happens if you use the right button. Tim?
Yeah, I think I disagree there, because if you say allow on button push in the future, then it means that with a website upgrade and change of style, you need to be able to recognize which is the Pepsi button, because that's the button you're going to press to allow this thing. And there might be a billion buttons that are on the page, and which one's the Pepsi button now that it's gone into dark mode with super ice coloring or whatever, some new user experience thing.
Well, I mean, if you push on if there's a fake Pepsi button and a real Pepsi button, it doesn't really matter, because if you click the fake one, it's not going to be able to give you unprompted access to the camera or microphone. So there's really no risk there, right? Mike?
I think that's correct. So I would second what Janivar just said. I would also say that the core idea of this style of element controlling a capability is that the presentation is, to a large extent, controlled by the browser. This means that there are styling options that developers have in order to make the presentation of the button match the surroundings. So as you say, dark mode versus light mode, or if they change branding and a color scheme changes. But the core things that we in Chrome at least think are valuable are the icon and the text, and some rules around that to make sure that they have sufficient contrast such that they are legible, and additional rules about the visibility on the page and so on, where I am confident that different browsers will have different opinions. But the core idea is that no matter how the presentation of the button changes, the core elements will remain in place and will remain visible to users in a way that we believe is legible and comprehensible.
Yeah,
Yes,
and recognizable.
Yes. So I think, Tim, what you might be worrying about is if there's a real Pepsi button masquerading as a button, more benign button that doesn't turn on the camera. Is that fair?
I don't really know exactly what the risk is here, and to be fair, it's the first time I thought about it. But I feel like if you're offering users the ability to allow something on a future button push, it's kind of implicit that they need to know that this is the button that they're
recognize it.
Promising.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think Chrome team, Mike just mentioned some restrictions on styling, which one way to go, and he also mentioned other browsers. I think Mozilla does have a more flexible position on this, in that we have some ideas where we could allow styling, because since the goal here is to replace an existing button, I think websites are going to balk if they don't have some styling control. And we had one internal idea, which we'll share for free, which is that we're thinking, it might be too clever, but to basically, the first time the user pushes a button when they get the prompt, we'll take an internal screenshot, so to speak, of the button. And on future visits, we compare the button to what it looked like before, to make sure that it looks the same before we give unprompted access. And if it doesn't look the same, you'll get a prompt. But these are, UX ideas. It's not something we're promising to doing. This just off the cuff idea that we had to allow a little more styling. So yes,
Okay,
your core
thanks.
point is that it has to be recognizable is an important aspect. All right. Yes, so this slide shows it all together. But hopefully it means to show, and for people, I'm using colors here, so the blue arrow is allow this time, it leads to prompt fatigue. The green arrow is allow button push, it leads to no prompt or privacy compromise. And the red arrow is the allow always, that avoids prompts forever, basically, but with a privacy trade-off. Next slide. And this shows the same thing again from the perspective of being in a future visit. Next slide. So we talked about geolocation. Now here's what I'm proposing. This is my sort of vision of Pepsi for camera and microphone. Or let's start with microphone first. Following the same model as geolocation, we have a very simple HTML element. And here you can imagine it has the ID equals microphone, but no other options. And it has a toggle button shape without text, or alternatively with text. Maybe this is a configurable option. But the goal here is really the minimal one, so that we can provide a button that stays on the page that the web developer, that the website wants to keep around. So the API itself, basically there's a set constraints method, in which case you can set all your constraints. You can provide also, device ID to provide local storage. Basically provide the same microphone as the user used last time. And then basically when you click the button, go ahead. I thought there was a comment, sorry. And the other change is difference from geolocation is that it doesn't say use microphone, it says turn on microphone, because these are meant to be toggles, so that the user can, once they've turned microphone on, they can use the same button if it's still there to turn it off. So when they click it to turn it on the first time and there is no stream, a stream, basically the button will call get user media for you with the constraints. And when the user allows it, if there is a prompt, it will create a stream. And you get a stream event fired on the button, similar to geolocation. This has new information on the button. There's an error. Either there's an error or there's a stream object, in which case you can get the audio tracks from that stream object. This is also a good time to attach handlers for a mute and unmute event. And the reason I'm doing that here is that I'm proposing, there's a question of how should this toggle work? And there's a couple of ideas we banded around here. One was that we would basically just change the track enabled flag of the one track that get user media returns. And this proposal is basically, it started out a little more broadly. We thought this was a good time to introduce a source level mute that would mute all tracks at the source level. But this could also be implemented, but there's some problems with that, which I'll investigate on the next slide. So for this slide, it basically just showing that the single track that returned when the user clicks the button, the toggle button later, then the browser would fire mute or unmute on the track. This is one idea, but I'm also open to other ideas because again, we want to create a button that web developers want to keep around. And it's basically calling replace track to, we're assuming basically that the user is in a video conference. So we're replacing the track that's being sent to the other side. And this track is automatically affected by the mute feature of the button. So this is, again, a page-embedded powerful feature control button. The user, not the website, initiates resource acquisition by using the feature through the button. Next slide, if there are no questions. And this is similar for camera. We have a camera icon, toggle button, turn on camera, not use camera. We can set video constraints in this case. And you find the stream event on the button, UN.
Yeah, about muting. So you're saying the muting will only be on the track. I think that then if the web page is cloning the track, which happens a lot, then you end up with a track that is muted and a track that is not muted. So from an OS perspective, you end up with OS signals saying the capture is live and is not muted. So you get an icon on the web page which is not synchronized with what the OS or the user agent is showing. So I would expect that we would need to have like source level kind of muting. Otherwise, we are not able to reconcile all these icons.
But it's a fair criticism that this is reusing the mute concept on a per track level, which I think you could argue that mute, if your argument is that mute is solely a source level concept, then you could argue this conflicts with that. I was thinking of it more as on top of, so that if the website only uses a single track, then when the browser mutes that single track, then the indicators would indeed go away. But as soon as you clone that track, as long as there is one, more than 0 tracks active on the page, then obviously the indicator should stick around. So, but yeah, so just to walk through the example here. So the main difference here that I wanted to highlight was that I'm showing how that we send the original track to the video sender, which is affected by mute and unmute. But then part of the feedback we got was from web developers was that there's a difference in this. There's a difference between transmission toggle, which is what this is in Google Meet that we're using right now, for example. Like if I mute myself, then you can't see me. But that doesn't mean that, in this case, I also can't see myself, but that's a web developer choice. That you could imagine that they wanted to still show self view in that case, for me to do like a comb check or sneeze or whatever. So, and while I would personally love to have stronger, guarantees to the user here, the problem we run into is that there's nothing that prevents there's nothing that says the website needs to keep this button around. So I think we need to make a button that web developers want to keep around. And if that button is going to restrict and limit the website, they're going to probably just show the button initially and then remove it and replace it with a generic toggle, because they get more control that way. So this was meant as a trade-off solution where it's sort of usable for simple applications, get the default behavior, but advanced applications have ways around it. I didn't show this in the microphone slide because a similar example for the microphone slide would be to keep a track clone around to do voice activity detection, for example. Like are you talking? Your microphone is muted. I didn't include that because I know there's been good work done in Media Session to provide voice activity notification. So I think there's our spec basically already allows user agents to mute at any time, at any point. So if a browser wanted to, there's really no reason they couldn't. This would introduce differentiation between permission models again, but let's say a privacy conscious browser wanted, like in private browsing mode, for example, you could imagine that if a browser did mute all the tracks and not just a single track in this case, you would give the user more powerful controls at the cost of web compatibility. So I don't know what the right answer here is.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tim?
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I just want to dig a little bit into how this button behaves in the case where you've said allow on button push. So does that, how does the future page receive this on-stream event? Under what circumstances does it receive this on-stream event? Does the button have to be physically present on the page for it to get a stream?
Yes. Yes.
And so now we have the situation that the thing, it means that my desire to be able to access local IP addresses is gated on me having a microphone symbol on the screen.
Oh, no. Okay. You're talking about the RFC that limits ICE based on user media capture. That's an excellent question. And I think it's something that we might want to, I actually believe that one still talks about permission. So there might be a loophole here. I don't know if it actually requires capture. I don't know if you know that, but that's something we should investigate. I agree that, that might be, that's the best we could do in the old days. I'm not sure this is necessarily a blocker.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, I just think
what
that it's an issue that we need to would need to float, because I really don't want to have a microphone icon permanently on a page that's like to do with local video.
Right. I mean, allow on button push would be a persistent permission technically, even if we never expose it. So the browser could definitely implement a rule that says, oh, this user has given persistent permission to allow on button push. Do all the ICE you want, for example.
I mean, the other option is to decouple those two permissions, which is, I think, where we should go. But
Yes.
I know we won't.
You're correct. It adds an extra wrinkle in all this, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree that we should decouple those permissions, but only in the sense that there should be multiple ways of getting that permission. We can't, for backwards compatibility, we can't change the fact that current permission is given along with the camera. So, but that's a different topic.
Yeah, isn't it tied to permission or not use? I know we cleaned up the spec a lot to be around use and not just permission, but I don't think the RFC was ever updated. So it might still only require permission. So, all right. So I hope that explains things well. I think one of the questions for the group is if they like this idea of muting the single track, or we could go more basic and just say that it toggles the same track enabled flag for you that the website already controls. It has the benefit of being less suggestive of stronger guarantees. Or it could just be a toggle button that does nothing, and you basically have to write the JavaScript itself that says, if on change or on click, then set track enabled to true or false. All right. So maybe we can take that at the end. Next slide. So for completeness, I also wanted to mention why not both? In the case of so how is this going to work on the page? Like the page we're sitting on right now has separate microphone and camera buttons. And I've noticed that if I join the meeting without permission, then I basically have to click both buttons to turn it on. So there's an option. There's still going to be use cases for, like in the priming example, where it's easier to ask for both at the same time. It's a user trade-off. What if the user doesn't want to turn on both? Things like that. But again, this proposes a third element, which is the user media. You set constraints that are different. In this case, is both video and audio constraints. These are dictionaries that basically contain both. Looks very much like a user media, except true and false are not allowed, because if you click this button, it's going to ask for both. And then similarly, there's a stream event, and we use promise all here to check that we got basically, we want to deal with each track, audio track and video track, and we basically replace track both at the same time. And there's a self-view example as well. Yuan?
Yeah, so first thing is about set constraints. I think that I wonder whether we want to allow all constraints or whether we want to, since it's redefining an API, maybe we should reduce things initially. So exact, blah, 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 all this stuff, we could remove a lot of these things and just have
Advanced.
an object and just ideal constraints, maybe not all constraints. Anyway, that's the first thing. The second thing, dedicated to user media, when I see the icon, I'm not sure we will be able to have an icon that conveys the fact that you're capturing both camera and microphone. So I'm wondering whether this user media element is MVP. Is it something we need actually? Is there web developers demand on that, or whether we could like leave it for V2 and concentrate solely on microphone and camera at first?
I would second that, but I also know that I think the Chrome team really wanted this one. And you're right about the icon. This is basically what ChatGPT thinks it should look like. Maybe it could be a button without an icon. Maybe that's better. I tried having the icon separate, but that gave the wrong impression that these were individually clickable. And if you click on either one, then you would get both, which isn't great. So this was more, yeah, I think this is the least interesting button personally, but I wanted to include it because that's where the proposal came from.
Also, if you click this button and you click allow on button push, then it would mean that you would allow also microphone solely and camera solely. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. It starts to be complex to me, but anyway.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm happy with dropping this one if need be, but it does mean that, if we go to the last slide, sorry, the next slide, not the last slide. So basically I can sum up the behavior here. So in conclusion, basically allow on button push, I would claim becomes near indistinguishable from allow always, as soon as long as we assume that you're entering the page muted, but with superior privacy characteristics. So that means that you can turn on camera and microphone basically with 2 clicks. There's no prompts, and it's just as good as allow always in that case. Mike?
I think the first time you visit the page, you would need 4 clicks, right? You would click on microphone and then allow whenever button click, and then you click on video and do the same.
Yes, or maybe 3 clicks if you do the, I don't know. But yes, 4 clicks, I think, is the expectation there.
Yeah, which is generally the value that we've heard developers ascribe to a user media style element. Insofar as the JavaScript API gives them the ability to gain access to both camera and microphone with a single prompt, whereas splitting the capabilities into 2 separate elements. I agree with you generally that once you have the ability to use these elements, it makes a whole lot of sense that we would create a mechanism that ties the capability to the element in a way that allows developers to understand both where it's coming from and give users control. But that initial acquisition stage seems like one in which we would create additional friction for both users and developers that I'm not sure either would appreciate.
So I think there are a couple of ways to approach that. I think, would you be more inclined if we could get it down to 3 clicks?
I mean, less is better. So I'm
Okay.
excited about continuing to collaborate. I'm just trying to explain why the Chrome team believes that something like user media is valuable to pursue.
Right. Like I have noticed in the example in the first slide that I had, the web prompt came up with the idea of, if you click the button that says use camera, but there's also a grayed out button that says use both camera and microphone. And I think similarly, browsers perhaps could do this, because the browser couldn't, if the browser detects that the web page has both buttons, for example, it could experiment with a permission prompt that gives the user the option to allow both camera and microphone. So then you could save a click that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm enthusiastic about finding ways to have our cake and eat it too, with regard to the prompts that we put in front of users and the style of access that you're proposing here. Like, I personally think it's pretty reasonable. I think that some kind of declaration on the page's part, whether it is having both elements visible to the user, or whether it's some other kind of declaration on the page's behalf that says, hey, I'm a video conferencing app. I really want both camera and microphone. It would be fantastic if you would help me get it. I'm sure that we can find some kind of solution there. I think it's simply necessary to recognize that that is a potential problem, or a potential piece of feedback that we'll hear from web developers if we only have two separate elements, and we would need to come up with some clever UX or clever heuristic along the lines that you're proposing in order to address it.
Right. No, I agree with that. And just to reiterate, I think if a website puts both buttons visibly on their page, I think that is perhaps already a signal that the website would be happy with both. And I've already probably also set up listeners for both. So in that case, it becomes the trick of how to respond if the user grants both. Yeah.
I think that's totally true, and I don't want to red hole on this, so I'll just say one more thing.
Okay.
It is the case that having both things on the page is probably a good signal that the website would like access to both. At the same time, having two separate things means that we need to be really careful about the UX that we present when the user clicks on just microphone, for instance, because, like, I don't know, I didn't want to have camera in this meeting, so I only clicked on the one. If we make it too easy for them to fall into granting or turning both on, then they would be surprised in a negative way. So it does put, I think, relatively substantial UX challenge on the browser, but that's probably the right place to put the UX challenge.
All right, thank you. Those are very good comments. And I would also just say about the first sentence here on the slide. It's near indistinguishable from allow always, provided you enter the page muted, which is, I guess, the one thing that's lost here is that there might be users who would prefer to jump right into the meeting with camera and microphone blaring. And I guess allow always is for them. And we could solve that similar to how geolocation solves it. It has like an auto locate attribute on the element that would satisfy, basically, if you put the button on the page, on page load, you would basically get stream event fired if there was permission. So the API shape at least handles it really well. Tim?
Yeah, I think an example of an application in the latter category is something where which is basically using the phone as a camera. So you don't you're not rendering anything locally. You're just using the thing, switching it on. You're expecting it to record video and audio like straight away, and having multiple buttons on that screen is unnecessary and confusing, and you probably don't want to press any of them. You probably expect it to start straight away the second time. And obviously the first time you need to give it permissions and all that. I think we're all used to that, but I think the second time you use the app, you would expect it to just start recording, I think.
Yes, I think if we follow geolocation here and there was some kind of auto camera, like the auto locate feature, basically you would need to put the button on the page. But if you had persisted always allow permission, it would basically get camera and microphone, the stream event fired immediately. You could use the stream immediately, and the toggle button would be on basically immediately. But it would be still there if you wanted to turn it off, I guess. But I'm running out of time, so let me try to summarize here. This is my pitch page. Basically, it's truly in page embedded, replacing existing buttons in precious layout real estate. You get full GUM control from one button, from button for one track, initial access and mute toggle. Basically, for the web developers, it means no permission handling needed, no permission issues with blocked or gray, no wrestling with different browser models, hopefully, knock on wood, if we all agree. Firefox is the only browser that has a per device permission, and so we're also keeping an eye out for things that work well there, and it seems to work well. Simple apps can rely on built-in button to driven track mute and unmute, and advanced apps can clone tracks to avoid auto mute, for instance, for self-view. And our last point, Mozilla is open to allowing styling to satisfy video conferencing layout needs. Ewan?
Yeah, just to be back to mute and unmute, I think it's something we need to discuss further if we want to go there. Safari is the only browser that is exposing the fact that the user capture is muted, and there's a Safari UI for that. And some users are confused when this icon is different from what the website is showing as a button. So the default behavior should be what is not confusing to users. So to mute the whole capture session, meaning you have a track, so basically source level and not track level. If the web page is complex enough that this behavior is not suitable, then you can actually have the button not be visible and not use the mute feature that this button would provide, and that's very easy to do as well.
Yes, I think we should discuss that more, and I'm open to that. I think that also we should call out the media session has done a good job adding a toggle microphone and toggle camera API that we're in the process of implementing that does a good job of solving the quote-unquote double mute problem that allows websites to update their button state to match the browser state. I'm hopeful that can be solved there.
I didn't know that. One thing we could discuss is implement it so that it's not transient activation that allows to unmute without some prompt, but just asynchronous quick event handler. And that's what Safari is doing. But of course, there's no HTML primitive to actually tell that. So the only thing we can say in the spec is transient activation, and then user agents can be more or less lenient. And we're seeing that it starts to be a compat issue because most browsers implement the relaxed way, which is fine in some cases, but in terms of microphone and camera, it doesn't seem very fine to me.
Yeah, so to be clear, I think Firefox, we would implement it for picture-in-picture controls first, but we also have a global mute toggle behind the pref that has the double mute problem that we hope this could help rectify, but no promises yet on whether we'll make that default behavior. But yes, the Safari pause button is a good example of solving mute and user agent mute. I think that hopefully can be orthogonal, or at least needs to fit in well with this. And on the last point about styling, I mentioned the idea earlier about comparing, that the button is legible, or at least as legible as it was earlier. So this is basically the last page, except there's one more page about future. We could go to the next page. So basically, part of the reason Mozilla is excited about having a button on the page is that if we can get web developers to leave it there, there's some promise of adding additional functionality and features here that can undo some of the things trade-offs we made in the media capture and stream spec, where we're not following the tags guidance basically on device enumeration, which is says to don't reveal more information than the device you're selecting, basically. So both Chrome and Firefox today offer limited in-browser device selection today. but only if there's a prompt. So you only get that nice, you have all that nice UX, but it's only used one time and you never see it again if you do allow always, for example, or allow on button push. So that's what's on the mocked up on the left here, basically. And I've actually learned that Pepsi now does support this, but these are actually markups I made because I didn't know that. So I'm assuming that they would have that these are Chrome screenshots, mockups of Chrome screenshots where I've combined the preview with the buttons, basically. So this is not real on the left. But in the future, we could, for instance, add a little. Once we have a button on the page, maybe the web page adds a little bit like a sidebar attribute to the element, and then you get a little pop-up button where you can not only pick microphone and camera, but you can also see previews of cameras or microphones, because these are basically browser rendered. So the picture is basically unified in browser selection and previews available the same way ahead of initial permission, and also for switching anytime by firing the stream event again. So that's more of a motivation down the road to making a button that web developers want to keep around. And that's it. Thank you. Any questions? I think we're at time, so it's a good time if there's no questions.
Yeah, so I only have a slide, and it's basically a summary of things I have discussed with Min, who gave us a presentation in our previous meeting about Pepsi, and what the chairs have discussed also about this, about continuing collaboration between Pepsi and the WEBRTC working group. So we're planning to have the part of the editors meeting this week to meet with members of the Pepsi team to get a status update, and the goals are to get a status update, to try to agree on a minimal set of features for a V1 and a roadmap, maybe a roadmap for future features. Discuss the developer feedback that they have with the Origin trial, which has been used by several major video conferencing applications. So, and to decide if on plans for periodic meetings to finalize details about V1 and a roadmap for the future. We could do it possibly with half of the WEBRTC editors meetings for a few weeks, or we can create another slot if that's also possible. So that's basically what I wanted to say here. I don't know if anyone has anything to add here.
No, that sounds great. Only that I think it'd be important that these be public meetings, and that people here would be invited to them, and also some kind of minuting of the meeting. Does that sound good to the group?
Yes, we can sort out the details. I mean, we already have scheduled a meeting this Thursday, and then we can sort out use that meeting to sort out these details. Yeah.
All right.
Good.
That sounds great. So I guess I had one question for Mike, since you're here. I guess what I hear so far is that we have questions around mute and unmute. We have questions around API shape when it comes to the user media element, whether that's MVP or not, and styling and constraints, I think, are the four that I remember. I'm wondering, Mike, if you had any others.
No, I think that basically covers it. And there are definitely places. Well, basically, I think we're open to collaboration on basically everything. I don't expect that we're going to reach the same conclusion on all of them. I think the one thing I would add to your list, or maybe you said it, was styling and the kinds of restrictions that we would place upon it.
Yes.
I know that's an area where there's just disagreement, and we'll have to figure out what to do with that. But I'm pretty confident that we can work something out.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Ewan?
Yeah, for geolocation, it's unclear to me whether the current Pepsi button is expected to last very long, or whether it's just a button that you show, the user is clicking on it, and then you can forget it. Part of the design that you're pushing is actually trying to make sure that the Pepsi button for microphone and camera would should last for a long time. And I guess that's a key design principle that we should discuss as a starting point.
I think I would say that it's perfectly reasonable for different buttons controlling capabilities to have different paths that they expect developers to follow. For geolocation, I think we'd be super enthusiastic about getting feedback from WebKit, Mozilla, and anyone else who's interested on the decisions that we made with the version that's shipping in 144. I think there's still a lot of room for collaboration and adjustment there. The partners that we have do intend to leave the button on the page in order to give control over whether location is attached to a search, for instance. Like the button will be there in order to make that attachment clear. Whether that's always the case, I can't make any promises. I think developers are going to do what developers are going to do, and ideally we'll design things that help them make the right choices for users.
Right. I think I agree with that. I mean, I guess we could explore, if we wanted to, ways to punish websites. So maybe your permission would go away if the button goes away, but hopefully we don't need to go there.
The only thing I would add to that is that as long as the API exists, it's going to be really hard for us to make meaningful and durable changes to the access level that's associated with a button. I will say that we should be finding ways to constrain the APIs in order to push developers to better patterns once we agree on what those patterns are. So maybe we can collaborate on finding good patterns for developers, and then we can collaborate on finding ways to help developers find those patterns.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I think, no matter how fast we get here, I think we're giving browsers more opportunities here, I think, with having an input on this process. So I like that. All right, I think that's it for discussion. Any other questions, Guido?
No, I think we can move to the next topic. So this concludes all our Pepsi discussions for today. So thank you, Mike, for attending this meeting. Very useful.
Thanks, folks. I will drop off because I have nothing useful to talk about with the rest of the topics. Thanks so much.
Right. Thank you. This is Ewan, I think. You're up.
Yep, and hopefully it will take just 2 minutes. So we decided to split the path stream transform in a stream-based object that is only usable for streams, and another object that is only usable for sender and receiver transforms. And the current sender and receiver transform are called S-frame sender transform, S-frame receiver transform. And as noted by Casper from Cisco, it would be good to add the WEBRTC prefix, which is more consistent with existing web APIs and is also consistent with WEBRTC script transform. So the proposal here is to add the WEBRTC prefix to S-frame sender transform and S-frame receiver transform. And that's it. Roots?
Yeah, so Jan over here, I think this is a great idea. Just hoping that you can take on the task the action item to update interrupt 2025 when we break them again. There's a interrupt 2025 filter that relies on these names.
Yeah, I'll talk to them before merging the PR then. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not hearing any objection. So
No,
I think
I agree
we
with the change too.
okay. So I think we will. So we'll let editors work on updating the spec.
Right, great. Thanks. That was quick. Next slide. Is Guido?
Yes. So I'm going to talk about the dropped frame counter for media stream track processor, media capture transform. So media stream track processor, which we use for the use case of processing raw media, raw video specifically. It has a limited internal buffer for incoming frames, frames coming from the source connected to the processor, from the track connected to the processor, and it can drop queued frames if they are not read quickly enough. So ideally, the application wants to process all frames that are flowing through the track. But if the processing is slow, that can result in dropped frames, which in turn results in degraded quality. So knowing if frames are being dropped would be a very good signal for the application to determine if processing is proceeding at a good pace, and gives the application the opportunity or the ability to adapt its behavior based on how frames are being dropped. So the application might decide to stop processing, or to use a lighter weight processing, or to offload to server-side processing, or any other thing. There are some unergonomic and imperfect ways to estimate drop frames today. For example, you could use two media stream track processors, one for actual media processing and one for just counting and discarding frames quickly. So the second one is less likely to drop frames, but still is not guaranteed, because there could be contention, priorities, depending if you're running these in different threads, there could be scheduling issues. So that it could give you an estimate, but it's not guaranteed. And there are probably several other ways, looking at other stats and some other objects. But a more accurate and ergonomic way would be to just add a counter for dropped frames to the stream track processor. So basically, my proposal is to add an attribute called frames dropped in the stream track processor. And whenever the processor is dropping frames from its internal queues, then it increases this processor, it increases this counter, and then the application can use it as part of its processing to decide if it needs to make any adjustments. So that's basically it. So I wanted to ask the working group if they like this idea, or if they have any objections or alternative ideas. Yes, Oliver?
Yeah, so I think this looks good. Just thinking of other ways you could avoid it. I guess you could solve it with high watermark, or have a stream node that introduced a buffer queue, basically. So as you mentioned, this is only a problem if you don't pull fast enough. So by that logic, you could write JavaScript that pulls fast, and then, but it gets quite complicated compared to just, I mean, the feature here is that media stream track processor does drop frames. So I think it's reasonable to expose the frames that it drops. Johan?
Yeah, media stream track processor is a sync, so having drop frames at the sync level is making sense to me. I guess there the definition of frames dropped is only the frames being dropped at the sync level, meaning you get a frame and you hop to the worker thread, and maybe the worker thread is too busy, and you enqueue another frame which removes the previous frame, and that's the one you will. That's where you will increase the counter, and it's an internal behavior of media stream track processor. You expose it. I think it's fine as long as we keep frames drop being stable over a loop task, an event task. I don't think we need events there, although usually when attributes change, we like events, but I don't think that we want events there. It's really a stat. So this seems fine to me. I would need to think more about the relationship between frames drop and the size that you can, the size of the buffer that media stream track processor is using, because in some cases, if you have a size that is too big, the user agent might need to reduce the size so that the camera stream is not can still create new video frames and is not starving for the buffer to be consumed by the website. And so there could be interaction between this parameter and frames dropped. So that's the only thing I will need to think a bit more carefully about.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I had a question. How does this new frames dropped differentiate? Well, how is it different from media stream track video stats discarded frames? How would they interact?
Well, these are frames dropped at the sync level. So this is not a track stat. This is a sync stat. So these are not frames dropped by the track. These are frames that are flowing through the track and are reaching the sync. But the track gave it or tried to deliver it to the sync, and the sync decided that it made it to the sync. Maybe it went to the queue, but once in the queue, it was not read, and then was replaced by a newer frame, for example. So this is a sync stat, not a track stat. So,
All right, thanks.
Tim?
Yeah, two things. Well, I wonder whether it's discarded rather than dropped, because it's kind of intentional rather than accidental, if you see what I mean. But that's minor detail. The other question I had was, do you see this property as being read on the main thread, or do you see it as being read in the worker, and or could it be done in both?
Could be done in both. It would be used. Its value would be used mainly in the worker, I guess, because you would want to adjust. I mean, the application could do it in the different ways, but the idea would be that you want to adjust how you're doing the processing based on the value of this property. So the application might keep track of how how this value is changing, or I mean there are different ways the application could adjust its strategy based on how this value varies.
Right. I was just thinking that if it's going to be done in the worker, then it's kind of it's relatively easy to keep track of it. But if it's done in the application, you end up polling it.
Yeah, you'd certainly use it in the worker if you want to, because you do the processing in the worker. Jennifer?
Harald first, I think. Or
No, I hit the wrong button. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to add that I think it's fine, but I think bike shedding on wording here, I think would be better to follow the naming we used in media stream track stats, which would mean discarded. We call it discarded frames. So maybe we could call it the
I'm
same.
fine. I took this one just because I saw WEBRTC stats, and there is one that we call that. So we have all sorts of names that we can reuse from different places. I'm pretty sure we have similar similar things with different names in different places. But the name I'm open to call it frames discarded for consistency with the track stats. I mean,
discarded
we have
frames.
some discard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we also have dropped frames somewhere and frames dropped.
We probably do, yeah. And also, it's also unsigned long in the stats media stream track stats. So we might want to do that as well.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. I this one I took it from WEBRTC stats, but we can use the one from stream track stats. I think long will be better since frames are quite frequent.
Thanks.
Joanne?
Another observation, which is related to this API. This API does not allow you to understand whether the frames were dropped. Like you're getting a video frame, and you look at frames dropped, and you don't know whether the frames have been dropped before or after this video frame. You will probably not be able to get this information through this counter. So I was wondering whether that's important.
For the use case that we envision, it's not important because the idea is that you're saying, okay, the processing is slow, so I'm dropping frames, so I need to adjust the processing strategy. So whether one particular frame, whether there's one particular frame that was missed or another, I mean, there might be some use cases where that could be important, but at least for adjusting processing strategy, it doesn't seem important.
Yeah, but that's my understanding from your use case. But I was wondering whether we actually want an API that would allow this or not, and we need to make a conscious choice there. So, for instance, if there was a counter on the video frame object, then you could say, hey, there's a drop between the counter of the first my video frame and the previous one, so I know that n frames were dropped between the two, and you know the number of frames that were dropped and so on. I'm not sure it's important, but we should think about it and be sure that not exposing this information is the right thing to do.
Yeah. We can I think we can sort out that detail once we have a PR, and we might need to for the right semantics, we might need to add more changes to the spec in the. But yeah, I think we can decide that once we have a PR and a concrete PR, and we see what the exact semantics are, and if how we can define it so that it has semantics that are useful, because it does make sense. It would be a nice property that you know that if you read it, then read a frame and see that it increases, that increase is after our frames that came after the last one you read, or something like that. That would be a nice property, although not strictly necessary for the use case. Jennifer?
Well, I was just curious, and if you meant that there would be some kind of sequence number, and then you would see a gap in the sequence number, and then that's how you learned that frames were dropped.
We could do something like that. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what we could do, but it seems that basically if you read some counter quickly, like for every frame that you get, you should be able to compute that information somehow, and knowing that there have been a few frames being dropped between the two video frames that you consume, for instance. It seems solvable, but we will see when writing the PR, I guess.
Tim?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you're going to try and use it at the application level, do you know what percentage this is? Like, there's no good knowing that 5 frames have been dropped. If 5,000 have gone through, you might not care, but if only 6 have gone through, then you might care. And I don't think that data is available at the application level, or is it?
Well, you're reading the frame, so you know how many made it through.
No, you're reading the frames in the worker.
But
At the application layer, you don't know that, or do you? I don't think you know that, unless it's a property of the track or something.
no. Well,
the
there
worker
are
is the
properties. There are properties of the track, but of course you can. I mean, the worker can have a statistic. I mean, can update can compute those percentages and pass them to the application.
I was basically thinking about the case where your worker goes off into an infinite loop or an almost infinite loop. And that's the point when you'd want the application to intervene and say, hey, look, turns out it's trying to do AI on an unsolvable problem or something. In which case you'd like the application to intervene and say, hey, look, this isn't going through at all. But I'm not sure it has the data to do that. I mean, we don't have to solve this now, but I just it occurred to me as we were discussing that there might be an issue there.
I guess.
But you can count basically how many frames you've pulled.
Yeah.
So if you pulled, yeah, like you just said, if you pulled 100 frames and 5 were dropped, your drop rate was 5%.
But you can only do that in the worker because that's where you're pulling the frames.
Sure, but the worker is the application, and you can always
if the worker, sorry, well, in that case, I've explained myself badly. You can't do this on main thread. So if the worker is running some piece of WASM that ends up disappearing into a situation where, like, it has to spend 3 minutes on a particular frame, you won't know that at the application level, in the main thread, which is where you would like to intervene. Because the worker's busy.
That's a good point. But I think that's a separate problem. So,
okay.
Well,
I think that's a separate problem. Yeah.
Let me try to answer that one, if you don't mind. I think the worker is where you want this information because that's where you're counting the frames, so you can correlate it with the 100 with the 5 and arrive at 5%. If you were to expose, say, frames dropped on main thread, now you have an issue because you have a number on the main thread that's not timed with anything else. So then you'd have to, then you'd be relying on timing differences between main and worker. So you want this in the worker. You want to expose it near where the other numbers are coming from.
I agree that the majority use case is in the worker. But the API exposes it in main thread, and I'm wondering about whether there's a way to use it usefully in the main thread. And I think maybe there isn't.
What I'm saying is that's a separate problem that we can try to solve separately. Like it's the case that the worker got into a bad situation, and you want to learn that from Windows so that you can do something to stop the processing or something. But that's a different problem. Yes, and I agree it could be useful, and we can try to solve it as a separate issue.
We should perhaps also call out that. Sorry, just want to call out also that in the spec, media stream track processor is in the worker, just in case it got confusing. All right, is that our last slide?
Maybe we want to have a resolution there.
Yep. So do we agree on ready for PR, and then we continue the discussion on PR, or at least consensus on supporting this use case? Yeah.
Yes, I think unsigned long.
Yeah, I think that consensus on continuing, like having an actual proposal, a PR proposal, And then depending on where we end up with like tackling the issue of finding where frames are dropped and so on, then we might come back to a working group for validation of the PR, something like that.
That works for me. Yeah.
Sounds good. Go on.
Good. Okay. So that's the last slide for today. So we have a shorter meeting today.
Hooray.
Yes. Half an hour back.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks
Okay.
everyone.
Okay,
Thank you.
see you all.